so excuse my twistering position, there's quite a bit of wind coming in. But before it gets too strong and before the rain starts, I wanted to take the opportunity just to explain a little bit about how we got here and why we're currently sat in Dover Marina and not anchored up somewhere on the south coast like the other boat is. And I thought it'd be quite a good opportunity also to explain a little bit about the reality of the decision-making processes that are going on and what it is that makes this particular challenge so hard and unique. So to start off with, this chart I've laid out basically shows this section of the coastline. So this is the southeast corner of England. So you've got the River Thames and then the end of the estuary here, Dover, which is where we are now, and then around through to the Isle of Wight, which is just here. We've looked at all the bits of the coastline in detail before we've gone, but one of the things that we've always said is that you really don't want onshore wind in this part of the coastline because there's just no shelter. In particular, there's no shelter from a wind coming from the south or from a wind coming from the southwest. So we've just been hoping that that doesn't happen, and of course that is exactly what we are faced with now. So we are currently here at Dover. The decision point and the place we turned back was here at Dungeness, which is really the sort of corner where you feel like you're starting to go along the south coast. This is really the last place that you can anchor that gives you any protection from the southwest until you get over here to Chichester Harbour, and that is where the other boat, Coastal Odyssey, have just made it to by the skin of their teeth. And not only is there no shelter along here, but even when you look at marinas or rivers that you might be able to get into, because it's so tidal and shallow, all of this dries out. So anywhere that you think you might be able to get into at low tide has no water in it. Or if there are patches that have water in it, then to get into it, you need to be there at a certain point in the tide. So not only are you thinking about where you can get to in terms of the weather, but also if we want to get in here, we need to be here at this time to that time, etc. So there's a huge amount of calculation. So we got to here and we needed to decide, really, knowing what weather was coming in, we needed to be able to get to here in 24 to 36 hours. And when we say 24 to 36 hours, you don't want to be erring on the risky side of that. You want to be staying on the conservative side because the conditions, the weather can change. They can come in earlier, it can be stronger than expected. And I've been in that situation before. So 2 years ago when I was doing GB Row Challenge and we were in the Irish Sea, we had a storm coming up behind us and we thought we'd identified an anchorage we wanted to get to. We were pretty sure we had enough time to get there. We didn't make it. We got within 10 miles and we never made it to the anchorage and we ended up having to get rescued. And that is just such a strong reality in my head, is that almost making it is no good at all. You've got to be absolutely confident of making it. That will make me a slightly more conservative skipper. I will take the more conservative choices when faced with those, because I've experienced what happens when you get it wrong in the wrong direction. If we get it wrong in the conservative direction, what do you lose? You lose a bit of time, and you lose the opportunity to comply with completely made up rules. Rules are made up. What we're doing is not made up. This is very real. We're out in the sea. It's dangerous, and I'm responsible for everybody's lives out here. So I'm not going to apologise for being a little bit conservative. So we decided that there was no way we could make it from there to there, or at least no way we could be confident of making it from there to there. And given the timings and what we've seen, and the fact that the other boat only just made it, us being a few hours behind means that we would not have done. So I think that was the right call. The other thing that I think is interesting to think about is, like, why were we 4 to 5 hours behind Coastal Odyssey at this point? Because we set off together from Tower Bridge. We were pretty much similar speeds of rowing. There's been times sort of all down here where we were ahead and they were ahead. and it's a really interesting example of how small differences and small decisions add up and turn into really big ones. So for us, the answer to that question of why we were 4 or 5 hours behind here goes back to up here. So on Monday morning, we were actually a bit ahead of the other boat. We'd found you can be in a slightly different position on the water and have really different tidal conditions. So we'd actually found that when we rowed onto this really shallow bit, which dries out at low tide, but it wasn't low tide, we were able to row against the tide quite fast. So we'd got quite a bit ahead here. We came down here, and this is where the wind hit us on Monday. So this was our first experience of an onshore wind. Onshore winds are dangerous, particularly when you're close to land already, because if you can't row against it, there's very little that you can do apart from just put out an anchor and hope that it holds. It's shallow water, so we couldn't use our parachute anchor. So our plan had always been, we knew the weather was coming, the plan was to get in behind the Isle of Sheppey and shelter from it there. We didn't manage to make it into there, and as soon as we turned this corner we realised it was going to be a challenge to get in there, and of course the more you try to get in, the closer you're getting to land, and then the more dangerous the situation is if you can't make it. So we stopped trying to get in and instead put the anchor down. The anchor didn't hold, so we tried 3 or 4 times, and every time we put the anchor down it did not stop the boat, it was just dragging along the ground. The other boat was around here and they were having the same issues. They eventually managed to get their one anchor to hold after a few tries. For us, we ended up having to deploy also our second backup anchor as well as the main anchor, and then also put out our drogue, which is just, it's heavy and it sinks to the bottom and gives us a bit more weight behind the boat. That combination stopped us, but that was our last chance really to be safe in that position. So but that meant that it was hard to get everything back up, because when you've got lots of things deployed, they're all pulling in different directions, some things are crossed over with each other, things get tangled, and we knew it was going to be a challenge to get it back. So whereas as soon as the wind dropped enough to make it possible to row, the other boat was able to just pull up their one anchor and start rowing off towards the corner on the previous tide, whereas we had to wait until the water was a bit shallower and the sea was a bit calmer to be able to bring in all of our gear and get it sorted and untangled, which we did, and that was fine. But then by that time the tide's coming this way up this bit of coast, so there's no way we could get around this corner. So then we had to wait for a few hours and time it so that we got to this corner on the next tide just as it turned to come down here. Now, as it happened, the other boat had some challenges and had to anchor up here for a bit, so we caught them up quite a bit round here. And when we got to Dover, they were only about an hour ahead of us. We heard them on the radio coming past Dover, but at that point it was coming towards the end of this tide that had brought us all the way down. So they went through an hour beforehand, so they still had an hour of tide to carry them away from Dover in the direction of North Foreland, of Dungeness. So they could just stay right out and take a route out here, where actually the tides are less strong. For us, we just made it past Dover at the end of the tide, but that meant it was about to turn, and there was a risk of us being pushed back across the harbour here. That obviously would be really not a good situation. So my priority, as soon as we came across, was to get ourselves into the shallower water so we had the option to be able to put the anchor down if we needed to, if we were being pushed back and couldn't row against the tide. But this is where you get the slightly stronger tides. So then when the tide was against us, it slowed us down more here than the other boat, who were able to be out here because they had more distance from Dover. So that meant that that sort of 1 hour here grew to 3 to 4 hours, and by the time that they got to here, we were about here. And that is the difference between being able to make it to here and not. And so as has happened, I think both boats have made good decisions that have paid off. We've been really glad to see that the other boat have just about made it into Chichester, but honestly, if we were an hour behind them, it would have been really not in a good situation, and we'd have struggled to make it in. So small decisions and little things that happen add up, and can just boats in different positions, and therefore different decisions are right. Always got to make the right decision for the crew that you're in, the position you're in, the time that you're there. Yeah, that's what we've done. So now we're in Dover. We're safe from the storm. It looks like a long way. In reality, when we get going again, if we get some good conditions, we'll very quickly be at the Isle of Wight. A good day's rowing. Well on the way down the south. All to play for still. Everything that's happened to us can happen to everybody else, and we've got so far to go and so much to come, and all the good bits to come, and we've been thrown lots of challenges early on which make us stronger than we'd ever have been for the rest of the row, so bring it on.